While the French and other European powers explore opportunities for trade, the Spanish take the lead in exploiting the Americas. By the mid-16th century, Spain's conquest of the New World extends from the Caribbean to much of South and Central America. Her island colonies have a thriving economy based on sugar production that relies on the forced labor of native Indian and African slaves.
Sugar plantations are very labor intensive. And so the native population, which was not accustomed to that type of labor, nor were they used to European diseases, was pretty much eradicated within the first 40 or 50 years. So they needed Africans to replenish and replace that labor force.
But while sugar is important to Spain's colonial economy, it is a distant second to the output of the rich silver mines at Zacatecas in northwest Mexico. To defend the mines and protect his treasure ships from European rivals, Spain's King Philip II envisions a vast new Catholic colony in North America. Called La Florida, the Spanish intend to claim and control the land north of the Caribbean, much of which has been explored, but not settled. In September 1565, Spanish forces land on Florida's Atlantic coast. After establishing a fort at St. Augustine, the small army destroys an outpost of French Protestants near the mouth of the St. Johns River, then marches north to the southern tip of Paris Island, where the Spanish build what they hope will be their capital city, Santa Elena. From here, Captain Juan Pardo is ordered to march inland to pacify the Indians and build a road to Zacatecas.
He was expected to march to the west and return in 9 weeks. The Spanish did not understand, despite their very extensive knowledge of the coastal areas, they didn't understand the overland distance from the East Coast to the southwestern U.S.
Pardo and 120 men set out for Mexico following trading paths that connect Indian towns in the region. The expedition carries weapons and small gifts for exchange, but little food.
The earliest Europeans in North Carolina were soldiers, and European soldiers were not accustomed to carrying their own food around with them. They were accustomed to living off the land and taking the food they needed from people they were invading.
The small army marches northwest following the Catawba River, stopping briefly at native villages along the path to proclaim the arrival of Spanish rule. But the people they encounter are more curious than conquered.
They had no idea what the Spanish were interested in. They had no idea that the Spanish may have in the future planned to enslave them or take their land or take their gold or whatever. And you see these things that they have that you've never had before. And so it's an opportunity to find out more about these people.
Indians often thought that these newcomers might be allies against the Indians' traditional enemies. And in those circumstances, the Indians could be extremely hospitable and welcoming and could share with the Europeans and hoped to recruit them into their diplomatic and military issues.
The Spanish probably viewed it differently. I think the Spanish understood a way of dealing with native peoples. They saw their chiefs the same way that they would see their captains or the governor, and they would negotiate with them. But at the same time, they felt that these people were certainly not the equal of Christians, that they, the Spanish, had the right to take over these lands, subjugate these people, and that they would do so.
By New Year's, 1567, the Spanish arrive at a large native town called Joara at the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains. With snow already visible on the peaks, Pardo orders his men to build a fort and wait for spring to push farther west. Fort San Juan is the first European settlement built in North Carolina. Eventually, the Spanish construct a series of 6 forts, strung from the coast of South Carolina to the mountains of East Tennessee. And many native villages build corn cribs to supply the Spanish soldiers stationed along the road.
The Spanish never brought other resources, food resources, to these villages. So the very basis of social relationships and political relationships among the native peoples, this idea of reciprocity, wasn't occurring with the Spanish. And the Spanish probably didn't recognize the importance of that relationship.
You find ways of exchange to draw those people into your community by creating a kind of quasi-kinship with them. If you feed them, you can then expect that they will have a responsibility to you.
Pardo garrisons a small number of soldiers in each fort and returns to Santa Elena. For nearly 18 months, the troops enjoy the hospitality of the Indians, but over time, the relationship sours. By May 1568, the Indians have had enough. In a series of attacks, native warriors burn the Spanish forts, killing all but one of Pardo's men. For nearly a month, the lone survivor travels by night to avoid capture and returns to Santa Elena bearing the bad news.
It's a curious report because he says that he was just outside the village, but he saw what appears to be an attack and that the fort was overrun. He doesn't give us a lot of details about what he witnessed, but I suspect he felt quite lucky to have made his way away from Fort San Juan.
Without native support, the Spanish abandon Santa Elena and retreat to St. Augustine. King Philip's vision of an expansive new colony fades. There will be no road to Zacatecas, and Spain will never again attempt to settle the interior of North Carolina. But while the Indians manage to oust the invaders, the diseases the Spanish leave behind will soon devastate the native population. By the time Europeans explore here again, many towns and villages will be empty.